hit. Eee, and there's the clickety-clack of the Troubles in Paradise opening that Peter came up with. That someday we'll have sound with it. You got to have clickety-clacks for all of that stuff because of the paralogs of Phileas Fogg. There we are, tortuganwordpress.com, Troubles in Paradise. If you don't have this bloody website on your fast dial or your smartphone, what the hell is wrong with you? Anyway, there's our opening show here, and we are starting another exciting day of our Evolution Hours, and we have some guests in the audience. We've got Jackson and we've got Cap, who will hopefully be monitoring the people over in the live chat, as well as communicating with me every once in a while to avoid the blathering part that I could theoretically get into. So we've got a busy show today. Obviously, to continue the exciting world of Let's Fillet creationist Rupe Sanford's book, Contested Bones. There we go. That was a gift to me by somebody who said, this looks stupid, but I don't have the time to deal with it. Could you evaluate the stupid for me? And I go, sure. So he sent the book to me, and I've been going through it to try to display. I know it may sound a little boring and anal retentive going through the source methods approach, but what it does is it builds up a full data field for the source in question. You can do it with an article, you can do it with anything you encounter online, you can do it with absolutely everything. It's a universal toolkit. With a book, it's more complicated. First of all, I noticed that it didn't have a bibliography, so I had to build one. And then I was trying to categorize how the sources were used and so forth. So far, over the last 10 weeks or so, it's been clear that most of the sources are used for authority quotes, that only about a third of the citations so far are to technical literature. A lot of them are not controversial in the sense that nothing is being marshaled that necessarily proves the anti-evolution case, but it's just there as data point. But about 20 some odd percent, about a quarter of the technical literature that they've cited so far, they're making false claims about. They are directly misrepresenting the source material. And today I'm giving another example. We're only in, let me see where I left off on my thing. I'm only about like page 68 in. Let me see if I can pull up the, there we go. And this is the exciting little skulls they point out between this Sangraham, that's an Homo erectus skull, and then this Cow Hill or Cow Swamp skull, one from Australia, that supposedly they're just so much alike that you don't have to worry about it. And some of the sources that they rely on are really old, like 1970s. There was a Nature article. I couldn't even find anything online about it, but I did put up the commentary that did get posted that was in that particular issue, pointing out all the problems with the interpretation about how squashed some of this data was and how they were having difficulties trying to figure out how it all fit in. And it turned out a lot of it related to when they were dated and what other data points were on the field, well, of which there's lots in the last 40 years. So trying to drag all of this dated material onto the field was a big problem. Well, we hit a big of a jackpot with the Thorne and Walpoff article from 1981, because that was available online. And so I put the linkage up to that, and we get to find out where some of these little skull pictures in that come from. So I'm going to go back over to the exciting world of Funky Downard tries to, I'm going to go for it. Hi, Peter. I'm just about to do my screen share here to show everybody what the hell's going on. I'm slow as molasses on this stuff. Hopefully you are now, everybody's seeing the skull picture? Hello?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Only 2 of these were used in the thing. This was actually relating to a bunch of other skulls, and this was taken from this Walpoff article. I won't rotate the thing around, although theoretically I could. But the point is, the thing you note off the bat is they're not complete skulls. They don't have the lower jaw. They've got fragmentary elements. Some of them may be squashed. Some of them date from a variety of periods. You can see the difference between the extreme brow ridge here. You can also see that there are some changes as to how bulbous this skull is as opposed to flatter down here. Well, this becomes more obvious when you look at the pictures they didn't put up, which was front view, to where you can see skull shapes and the location of the brow ridge down in here. This is the Cow Swamp one, which eventually got dated to about 20,000 years ago. You'll notice how high the skull is because they're humans. They're in the early stages of people that are migrating into Europe, but they're still fully human. The Sangrahan one, the lower right, that's one millions of years earlier. That's far earlier, and you'll notice how radically different the skull shape is. And then they've got Broken Hill, which is upper left, and Petrolona, that's more Asiatic things, and these are more standard humans. And you do see variations on these brow ridges, which can occur developmentally in a lot of different ways. But where we really got into fun, and there's another view looking at some of these skulls from another direction, you'll notice they don't look so simplistically, oh, they're just human beings, all of them identical, that there's in fact much more variation to these things. Now we get down to 345, where they did some authority quoting. And let me see where I'm at. Yeah, here we go. This discussion part here. Let me increase this image here so we can see a little bit easier. There we go. Now, we recognize that many of these features found in Sangrahan 17 can be found independently in other fossil crania of the genus Homo. Yet, here's where they decided to quote. Rupe quoted this part here. Yet in no other region can a specimen be found that combines so many features that seem unique, or at least of high frequency in Pleistocene Australians. End of quote. But look what he said next, the authors. Considering the amount of time involved and the extent of evolutionary change, it is surprising that any elements of local continuity can be demonstrated. Regional morphological continuity need not be considered indicative of prolonged genetic isolation or the reflection of a, quote, once pure Australoid race, unquote. Indeed, the grade differences between Sangrahan 17 and the Co-Swamp group outweigh the similarities we regard as due to morphological clade. And by and large, these differences reflect evolutionary trends that were worldwide. So there's a way more in this article, even though they're pushing a particular perspective, which was the multi-regional model, as opposed to straight out of Africa. That was a big debate going on in the 70s and 80s. In effect, now we know pretty much both sides were right and both sides were wrong. There's been a lot of mixture going on, and so parts of the multi-regional thing are perfectly valid genetically. They can start tracing this back to the haplotypes and all that other stuff. So I want everybody to have access to that article that they can go to and read the whole thing. And even though it's an old article and has been in some respects superseded by more recent research, the points they were raising were perfectly valid. And the point is that Rupe is misrepresenting the source by that authority quote. He is parsing down the material, because what they're talking about is a long spectrum of change that is occurring multi-regionally, where the beginning of the thing and the end point aren't the same species. They're not identical enough to just simply lump together as all human beings. And that's the argument that Rupe and Sanford are trying to make, that all of the variations that we can see going all the way back to these earlier skulls is just all just oddly odd people. They're not anything different from that, which, given that they have so far failed to outline any of the specific diagnostic features as to what they would accept as a transitional form. So we don't know what they would accept as a transitional form. So let me introduce our guests in here, since we've got Peter in the room. First off, Cap came in initially, and say hi to everybody.
Hi, everybody.
Oh boy, yes, he's on a puppet string. Hi, everybody. Jackson, give a shout out.
Shouting.
Shouting.
Yeah.
Yep.
Hello.
Yeah, that's also good to get it. Yeah.
Okay.
Can you repeat
it?
Still
says the lag. There was a lag on my screen. It said my mic was still muted, even though it wasn't.
Oh, well, we're hearing you just fine. So if you may be in a time dilation. Louisiana is in a different universe than the rest of the country, isn't it?
We're in real time.
Yeah, it's real time here in Washington State, as opposed to all the imaginary time. And speaking of really imaginary time, hi Peter, give us the skivvy from, what is it, early morning there in Holland?
I'm closer to real time than you are. I'm just an hour off. It's 2 a.m. here, so it's quite early for me.
Yeah, so it's still dark on our flat Earth. Where you are, where it's still bright daylight here on the flat Earth in Spokane.
It's extremely dark here.
Yeah. RJ, I do want to point something out the source of the chat, only because he is mentioned that we are going to get to him. But someone said this is some Harun Yahya argumentation already. Look,
Oh,
this
yeah.
looks just like The Living Animal by Nadar.
Oh, and Wonder Lady says she's going to draw RJ. Okay, beware. With my mug, I'm not that photogenic. I look a bit like a desiccated Machiavelli with glasses.
I was just envisioning if she had to draw like to signify your intelligence. Well, you know the cartoon caricatures of aliens, whether they're really big heads. I just you with like one of those heads.
Yeah. So the thing about it is, and the reason why I make such a big deal about the source methods approach to stuff is it's a double-edged vice. On the one hand, you got what the creationist claims and the sources they use to support it, and on your own, you're trying to deal with your understanding of the data field. And the more they are kind of controlling the show because they're the ones citing the technical papers, and you just look down at the bottom and you go, okay, that's a science citation. No, if you follow up on it, you've done two things. One, you are seeing what's underneath their eyeballs, literally. And also, you're learning what the data field is. And so you can start seeing, wait a minute, they forgot to mention that. And what about this piece of information? And what is this thing here in this other skull? Let me look that up. And, oh, there's a footnote. Let me find out about that. Oh, that's available online too, blah, blah, blah. And it's not that every person needs to follow up on everything. But what I've been trying to do in the network, and this very episode is an illustration of it, is that I keep on finding things I don't know about because I'm connected up in a network of people who are in effect doing some of the homework for me, and I'm helping with them, and then they come back to me. And so together, collectively, we all end up knowing more and are able to marshal our arguments with greater confidence and proficiency than we would have if everybody was trying to go their own little road and trying to reinvent the wheel every single time. The kinds of stuff I'm doing with contested bones, anybody can do with any anti-evolution work or anything you read online or any science work. And the thing is that what everybody wants to do, ideally, is to pick stuff you really love, things you're interested in anyway. You don't have to be hit with a cattle prod to look it up. You're going to want to do it because you're interested in that. And then if you're connected up with people who have differing interests, you can build off their expertise and understanding and their avenues that they can open to you. And I don't ever want to sound as if I'm the great pundit in Spokane who has the truth and everyone must listen. No, I'm given sources. Don't take my word for it. Don't take Cap's word for it or Peter's word for it or Jackson's word for it. You don't need to take our word for it because you can research for yourself.
RJ, I must object to that. You can always take my word for it.
Yes, well, the point is, can we separate the puns out first?
I must object to that. No one takes Cap's word.
Oh, now I don't feel so special.
Hey, I know you're
Brian.
Cap,
Brian Stevens has just pointed out, anytime you need homework done, I will help RJ. I have a big library. Indeed, that's part of the mechanism that goes on about stuff, that people can link up. Those of you who are on Twitter, you can contact me instantly. You can just message me. I literally pay attention to all that stuff. You can set up a direct message if you want to catch my attention that way, because there's menus that do those things. I'm always popping up, as we'll be seeing later on in the show. These are the bits I'm going to be talking about the dangers of creationist apologetics on religion, and also the Harun Yahya section that I'll be getting to a little bit later on. Those I found out about because of my networks that I dealt with. I just stumbled upon a reference to on my email to the religion matter, and that led to a bunch of stuff, and I got a whole bunch of links on that I'll be getting to. And somebody's got a background sound on there they might want to mute. And then the Harun Yahya thing was brought up by SciStrike, that I only discovered that late last night. Anyway, I'll explain all the little details there. But another thing that I do on Twitter that anybody can do if you have a scientific interest or any interest is you find if some scientist that you know of is on Twitter, well, follow them. And you're suddenly hitchhiking on their expertise. I can't possibly follow all the technical material that's swamping stuff. I look at PNAS, which is Proceedings of the National Academy of Science, but PNAS.org is the shortcut on that. And Science and Nature, because they're weeklies and they're kind of cutting edge material. But I have over 1,800 journals in my reference bibliography. There's no way human to be able to cover all of that literature that would be surging in. But if I'm following a series of litmus test people that are working in the core fields, they are monitoring their own field for us. And when they say, hey, this neat new paper on such and so, and they'll put the link up to it on their Twitter feed. Now I'm building off of them like a spider network of tracking that where they quiver. Oh, I go, ooh, that's right up my alley. Boom, thank you very much. And I can add that into it. So all of these networks are extremely effective. Brian says, planning on using Twitter more due to its ability to expand the field of receivers. Indeed. It took me a short while to learn Twitter haiku. That's back when it was 140 characters. Now it's 280, so there's a lot more room. And another problem with it initially was that if you had a long string of people in a Twitter feed, you would be crowding out the amount of text you could put in. Well, that changed when they altered the dynamics. So now it's 280 characters of text, whereas some links and all of the people you tag don't eat up quite as much space. So you can play along with that. There's also the matter of why I do it. Do I and Cap and Peter and Jackson all follow me on Twitter, so they see exactly what I do and why I do it. I'm not on Twitter feeds going after creationists because I think I'm going to persuade them that they're wrong. Oh, hell no. There's not a snowball's chance in hell of that. No. Forget that.
RJ,
I don't know. Sometimes.
Hey, RJ, there is a very. But when people say that, I always think of this. They're wrong whenever they say there's a snowball chance in hell, because it snows, I believe, quite frequently in hell. I mean, we are referring to
down in the lower echelon.
Right?
Haven't you seen the pictures? Dante's got pictures.
Oh, I thought we were referring to hell. Oh, you're referring to the fire and brimstone. Oh, my bad.
Oh yeah, no. You gotta get your traditional hell, not that newfangled one that Jonathan Edwards kept on bitching about in the 1700s. Anyway, I digress.
I don't know. I mean, sometimes
is that,
I think it's really interesting when they say they'll change whatever it is they're writing if you can prove that they're wrong. I love
how many
seeing
of them
people
have done
like that.
Yeah.
Well, I was supposed to talk to one, but then that got nixed. So
yeah, there's a lot of meaningless concession in the field. What you find in a lot of, all the way up and down through the spectrum, Michael Behe and a lot of others would say in principle that you show me evidence that I'm wrong and I will correct and I will abandon my viewpoint and so forth and so on. But in practice, no, they got a deep trench and you can't get past their defensive line on that. But that's not what I'm there for. No. What I'm there is to bear witness to sound method, to prod people, to remind people to not let them slip past invisibly and making claptrap arguments. So there's pushback. And especially in ones where there are a lot of people following, you can have things where like 40 people are in the thread, that maybe there's a chance that somebody in that field is like fence straddler and they're trying to figure out, is this side right or what? Who's got the data? And hopefully some of the things that I've contributed will make them think, he brings up stuff and he asks for evidence. And if you ask him where he gets his evidence from, he gives it to you. And maybe I should look into this a little more. And if you can get that started, that's precisely the point, which brings me conveniently to the second point that I put up on the linkages, which was this delicious stuff on, is there a pitfall to young earth creationist dogmatism? I can't confess to not having thought of this on my own, because I did, that here's a problem with young earth creationism that old earth creationism and intelligent design don't have to worry about. That young earth creationism is a really tight package. It's a whole bunch of stuff that's so interlocked that they can't allow anything about it to be wrong. That if you acknowledge that the earth is maybe 1 million years old, why, you have to become an atheist, because you've just destroyed the sin debt and Jesus's redemption and blah, 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 because it's all this tightly interlocked mess that doesn't allow any interpretive variation. Old earth creationists have already accommodated themselves to it. Intelligent designers don't bother about chronology at all, so they don't have to worry about it. And that what happens if you're raised in that kind of an environment? What happens if you suddenly have doubt? Any doubt anywhere threatens to obliterate your entire faith. And that this is one of the downsides of it. And I am not the only.
James,
yeah, jump
James,
in, Jackson. Peter.
It was me. It's a bit bigger. It's not only that you're obliterating their faith, you're crushing their entire identity at times.
Yeah.
For a lot of the
Hmm.
believers, it's not only their faith, it is their entire identity, and that's what you're attacking, and that's why it's so difficult to punch through and to get them to a point where they actually want to do the research and do want to check up what you're saying.
Here,
That's
Yeah.
that's the biggest
here's another element. It has to do with the Tortugan model of the mind that I have. And the important lesson to think about is somebody a Tortugan mind or not? In other words, do they have the ability not to think about things they don't want to think about? They're addicted to secondary sources. They don't really bother fact checking on stuff. That kind of mind, if it's raised in a creationist framework, is likely to stay there no matter what. But they can also come from a non-creationist framework. They have an epiphany later in life and they become the young earth creationist. That's just as possible. But what if they're not a Tortugan mind? And the issue then that comes up is you can be raised in a fully creationist framework, but if you have ultimately an open mind about things, you're not that Tortugan mind shell. The moment you encounter evidence to the contrary, that's when you make the shift. And it can be just as true of old earth creationists as intelligent designers, but the young earth creationist puts them in a much tighter box. So there was a series of links that came up about, in one case, I think it's Nellie Smith, that she effectively became a non-believer as a result of it. And there are a few others that fall into that same category. Others still have a spiritual mindset and they'll still stay in religion. They may become a Roman Catholic or a Protestant or whatever, but nevertheless, they don't give up their faith completely. But nevertheless, there's a big panic-stricken mode for people that were raised in this very rigid environment. And I'll put up a screen share here because one of the ones that came up in this thing that I didn't know about, that's one of the delights in finding information that I didn't realize was there, had to do, those of you who are familiar with Chick pamphlets, the notorious Chick, he just died, I think, last year.
Yeah.
Anyway, this fellow
Yeah,
who's an old
recently.
earth creationist, yeah, the old earth creation, this Matthew, the dark side of young earth creationism. And note, anybody who sees this opening segment here, this is so characteristic Chick. And the cliche of Chick is that he always has the opponents get angry. So the correct
RJ, you're cutting
position and
out.
reasonable, and gradually over to
You're
Arjun.
roboting.
Yeah, you're breaking up. I think you have too many
Oh, it's
windows
probably
open.
because I got a lot of windows
Oh, good. I thought it was just me.
open at the
Nope, we can't hear you. You're
sorry,
gone.
and
You're
that's
gone
probably
completely
the
now.
problem. Anyway, the upshot of his argument. Can you hear me a little better now?
Somewhat. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah,
I,
it's
I
probably
have a
because I have windows open.
James. I have a tool for you that
Mhm.
could help you. You could not only play your intro, but you can also present the stuff you want
Oh,
without
we will have to
using up that
converse
much
on
memory.
that then. Yeah, which we have obviously cannot do today. But yeah, we'll have to set up a time so we can kind of orient, because I am a novice in this area. I'm a schlub. I've gone from absolute complete nebbish ignorant on this field to the limited area that I'm doing now. So I'm the chess playing dog. I mean, I lose most of my games, but it's amazing I'm doing it at all. Anyway, the picture that was up, and you can find the link to it, is a parody of the Chick pamphlet. It's written from an old earth creationist perspective. And the upshot is that there was a history to young earth creationism that is really new. It came about in the early 20th century with Ellen White's Seventh-day Adventists that themselves came from the Millerites, the apocalyptic bunch in the 19th century, and then got co-opted by Henry Morris's young earth creationism in the 60s and 70s, and then magnified by your Kent Hovind style answers in Genesis. So he had the parody of the evolution of man chart, except with the people involved with the genesis of young earth creationism. And the upshot was that you may run into somebody who was the young earth creationist, and then they had their epiphany, and you meet them a year later and they're now an atheist and they're trying to disprove all of Christianity. And that does in fact happen. Well, that's the downside of that all or nothing approach that young earth creationists go into. You don't find that so often with old earth creationists or intelligent designers, because they have a more adaptive model that can incorporate elements. And I find that a lot in some of my Twitter jousts with people who can just with a bat of an eyelash accept that, you know, Michael Behe's this way. He sort of accepts human evolution, which has caused jaws to drop at some of the lectures that he does. But if you look at what he means by that, does he really mean that human beings developed as a speciation event out of Homo erectus and then from Australopithecines? I don't know, because he doesn't really come out and think so. So there's this fog banky thing that occurs on there. So anyway, you can look up all these various linkages to the various people involved in their postings on this that go into the emotional feeling for those who were highly religious. And I would suspect that they are low on the Tartucan index, that they were basically people who were always capable of looking at both sides of an issue, but for a long time, they didn't get both sides of an issue. And when they discovered that they had been lied to, misrepresented on source data, and they discover, no, the earth actually is really old, and there are people out there that manage to live decent Christian lives, and they are firmly believing in the blood of Jesus and redemption, and they also think that the earth is billions of years old, that suddenly everything is now in a mooring gone. They're up the creek without a paddle, and maybe not even with a canoe, and they have to figure out what their worldview is on that. So there's always a downside to this, and any dogmatism is dangerous. You found the same thing in a completely weird context. I think I alluded to this in Because the Bible Tells Me So in one of the footnotes, that if you looked at how communists left the Communist Party and when they did it, it had just the same kind of epiphany property that you find with religion. That the first group that left was in 1939. Why? Because Hitler suddenly signed a non-aggression pact with Stalin. And suddenly all the Russians are going, a lot of the communists are going, what? What? We've been told that Hitler is evil, and now suddenly Stalin, and you get a tilt. But that's not when the biggest bunch left the party. Most communists stayed in the party all through the 40s and 50s and that. And the big bunch that left the party was in 1956. And you might think that had to do when the Russians invaded Hungary, but no, that wasn't the impetus. No, it was when Khrushchev got up and gave a lecture on the evils of Stalin and saying Stalin was not right on everything. And suddenly that's when a lot of communists went tilt, because it's like the Pope suddenly getting up and saying Catholicism is wrong, I'm becoming a Hare Krishna. It's just total cognitive dissonance. And that's the block. I can't remember whether the numbers were like a third of the Communist Party filtered away in the United States or not. I'm just running off my memory there. But anyway, it was a sizable amount, but that was the biggest block that ever left them. Well, I think the religion dynamic was playing a role there, because the Soviet Union was functioning like a secular religion. It had its dogmas that it maintained. It certainly had its gulag. It didn't use the rack, but it was just as bad and just as dehumanizing. And I think the dynamics of that system was operating off of the same cognitive architecture that Torquemada was using in the Spanish Inquisition. So the fact that it took a cognitive dissonance epiphany moment to jumpstart people and to move. They didn't become all neocons. A lot of the people stayed very much leftist. You find them still popping up as activity during the Vietnam War era and all of that. But nevertheless, that role of cognitive dissonance in politics and religion and in any concept is probably a deep-seated one. And we should never think that it's just about religion, or that it's just showing up in flat earthers or young earth creationists on there. So let me see. Oh, I'm about halfway through the show. Well, I still got my files going on here. Another deadly screen share. And if I break up, then too bad. But anyway, that's one of the reasons why I don't like to do too much show and tell. And if Peter can help me on that. There's my patrons. Please help and support the project. Stephen, Dyer, Eat, and Yui, and Mona, and Hendril, and Jen, and Jody, and Daniel, and Ralph, and Eric, and Benjamin, and Staggles, and Alex, and Totis Real, and Everett, and Paul. These are people who have helped at the Patreon site. Although my obligatory point is they're really slow on getting money to me. It's thresholds and user usages and things, and it's very murky. Whereas the GoFundMe.com is really fast and direct. And so even though I've got a Patreon account, nevertheless, let me plug the GoFundMe. And then the WordPress.com thing, that's free. Everybody, everything on it, all the PDFs, you can share away. Thank you very much. And there's my little can rattle from a support thing, because I'm a Social Security person who's trying to make ends meet in a midlife crisis in the mid-60s to take on an entirely new thing and keep at it without any ads, without any corporate sponsors, without any cadres of churches. I envy Kent Hovind and Ken Ham for their support base that marshals that leaf of faith stuff. We secularists aren't as good at doing that. Yeah, jump in there, Cal.
I was going to say Brian G. I don't know if it was on there, but he just asked, does Professor Darren have a PayPal?
Oh, no PayPal directly, except the linkages, I think, can make use of that at the GoFundMe. I think they've got a variety of ways that they can put up through credit cards and all that.
Okay.
So I'll put the linkage up on that anyway. I know that everything that goes through there gets to me lickety-split, literally within a couple days. And so that sometimes has made the spectacular difference between able to meet the property tax or not as to what slips in on there. And I also get some book royalties. Everybody who buys my books, I get a chunk of that. Let me say it's way better than conventional booking in that respect. $4 a book, which is pretty nice. And so even though there's a chunk that I think I sold the Slam Dunk, I think is 20 some odd bucks. I get the royalties literally at the end of the next month. And again, that's sometimes been 20 or 30 bucks or more. That can be really, really helpful to somebody that's scraping along on about $900 of Social Security a month. So anyway, there we go. Okay, now we're halfway through the thing. We got all that part. Now we get to the exciting world of Harun Yahya.
James,
yeah.
James, I have a quick question, because I hate interrupting you when you're on a roll.
Oh, but please do. Otherwise, I run on indefinitely.
No, but you mentioned Chick, who died last year, and I at least had the courtesy to go to his website to verify this, because I hated the man completely. So I wanted to make sure if it wasn't
that he was really dead, not merely dead, but extremely dead.
On his website, it said God had called him home. And to me, immediately that raised questions, because it was close after Hovind redid one of his Chick tracts. So now I'm thinking, is this okay? That's it. Now you're getting home and off to bed. Is that what happened? God said, okay, so I've let you do all this stupid stuff long enough. If you're going to do this, now you're off. Go home. Go to bed.
Yeah, Jack Chick is well, let me be charitable. Let's say he was a snot-nosed prick. That he was a nasty, anti-Catholic, virulent, abusive purveyor of factual stupidity. And it was no coincidence that he linked up with Kent Hovind as one of his air quotes science experts for his human evolution, the Big Daddy thing. Anybody who had seen a Chick pamphlet, and they were just handed out like toilet paper routinely, and still are a lot by a lot of grassroots creationists. And they are an instantaneous measure of twaddle, because Chick pamphlets are so low on the creationist totem pole that they are not recommended by Answers in Genesis or Institute for Creation Research, your mainstream PhD types. But they do reflect that extremely virulent, anti-Catholic, hyper-Protestant, end times, Satan is behind evolution worldview. And Chick stuck with that down to the bitter end. So anybody that doesn't know about the Chick worldview that reflects that extreme hyper-conservative niche in Protestant anti-evolutionism, familiarize yourself with them.
I must point this out, though. Someone in the chat, AJS 1031. I think he's a very honored guest from. I think he's the coroner from Munchkinland, because he just said he's not only really dead, he's really most
I was
sincerely dead.
sincerely dead. Yeah, I was thinking of that same thing too. I was trying to remember the thing to sing it, but I couldn't
Yeah.
hit on it. Yes, really, most sincerely dead. Yeah, from Munchkinland. But yeah, a chick is one of those that's a litmus test thing. I've had people on Twitter where they'll put up an image from the Big Daddy thing, and it's so characteristic you immediately go, oh, duh, it's the Big Daddy pamphlet. And even if they've been using intelligent design rhetoric, the fact that they glom onto that is an instantaneous reflection of the websites that they're drawing off of, because you don't find that sort of argument or picture unless it's in the lower echelon, bottom feeder, young earth creationist wingnut bunch. So Chick is one of those litmus test items. And it was hilarious to see this old earth creationist do such a deft parody of it. So moving on to Harun Yahya. For those of you who aren't aware of Harun, and oh, bless you, you are blessed in not knowing about Harun Yahya.
Can I sum him, James? Can I sum him up,
Yeah.
please?
Mm-hmm.
It's Playboy Channel meets Kent Hovind.
Oh, God.
That's about right. Yeah, Harun is a hedonistic. When you look at his things, he's got a lot of scantily clad women popping up a lot. He's kind of a rich playboy hedonist. And so in that respect, he's no ISIS guy.
No, all of them are artificially enhanced, by the way. They're a showcase for fake breasts and big lips.
Yeah, he's got this weird. So
they all look like almost clones of each other. It's very strange.
Oh, good thing you bring up clones, Jackson, because that's the.
You're not going to tell me he does clone them.
RJ, I do have to point one thing out. You did say that if you don't know him, you're really blessed. So now you're trying to curse everyone by taking that blessing away. Everybody,
by selling.
Don't run, because you got to watch the rest of the show.
I'll give you a brief little thumbnail history of Yahya. He's a Turkish, started out as flirting with young earth creationism. One of his very early books that he did in 1999, which was all quote mining crap, was actually feeding off of young earth creationism. But apparently he quickly decided that that was not the right marketing move to do. And so he jumped to a much more generic old earth creationist intelligent designy thing. And he's never riffed off of any of the young earth creationist material, as far as I know, since. It really feeds off of intelligent design. And he has just a mountain of clone things. I think I cataloged at least 40 websites, none of which mention Yahya up front, but when you get down to the bottom, they've got links to other Yahya stuff and they have a bunch of different names and titles and all that that you can see. And I can't even say he's done books. What he ended up having, because he's a rich guy and he has a bunch of unpaid interns that basically generate these Harun Yahya books. That's a pseudonym. I think his name is Adnan Akhtar, if memory serves me. And he's about my age. I think he's in his certainly late 50s or early 60s, so he's roughly my age. And he's enough well-heeled that he puts up this vast vomit of material. Well, there's vomiting in a variety of ways. And the thing that popped up, Strike, who does the movie night there, happened to put up a little blurb where he called it to my attention that there was just this pile up that's reminded him of the nitwits that you would see on a flat earth channel that were haunting the FFRF, Freedom from Religion, Twitter feed in this exchange, where they had put up a posting, and suddenly there was this long line of posters putting up links to videos, and it was the same stuff over and over and over and over and over again. There was about 5 or 6 different videos, things on what what Darwin said about black people and Hitler and evolution, and fossil record does not support evolution, and so forth. And right off the bat, as I started to look in, when you come in on a Twitter feed, you're seeing the most recent stuff, and then you can scroll backwards and backwards and backwards. And I got my little dander up because I recognized some of these posts. I had literally gotten a direct link from 3 different people. I think there were even more than that, but there were at least 3, and I put some references in my own spreadsheet record where I kept track of it, that they look like they were Harun Yahyas. They were Turkish-sounding names. They were putting up the same linkages. even though they were supposedly different people, they had umlauts and stuff in their name. And I was instantly reminded of that when I saw this FFRF feed. So I got my dander up. This was probably around 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning yesterday. And I decided I was going to look into this more. And I started to keep track of them and put them in my listing. And bit by bit, in fact, I think I still got my spreadsheet back up. I don't even have to. I'm not going to put it on linkage, but I can go. There's Kagan Abaki and Kainar Abaki and Ruzgar Abaki and there's and Kagan Aklan and Emerhan Aklan and Amit Adnan and Emerhim Adnan and Ada Agloglu and Darren Akam and Iji Akar and Bora Akar and Ada Akayan and Corey Akaden, and all of these are just in that FFRF thread. The same things over and over and over and over and over again. I got really tired after I had about 80 of them listed in the thing, cataloged off. And that was about, I'd worked back 10 hours into the feed, and it was still going on. Oh, I looked down at the end, back another 2 hours. There were probably certainly another 30 or 40 of them that I didn't put into the listing at all. But anyway, while I was cataloging them, I couldn't resist. Okay, I'm going to directly tweet back to every single one of them. I'm sure the vast majority of them are just troll robots. They're just clone versions of things, because a lot of them had like 3 and 4 in the names, and the names are all very similar when you look at the thing versus the tag name and all that. And so I doubt many of them are real human beings at all. But I would point out that the one that really pissed me off was when they said, and Jackson has departed, but one of them insisted that Tiktaalik was a fraud, a forgery, the famous transitional thing. No, that's a bald-faced lie. That's I've never. Yeah, they were insisting that Tiktaalik was an actual forgery. And I said, how dare you? And I actually put the linkage into Neil Shubin, who was involved in this work, and he can make details accordingly. And so there were a bunch of these ones that would be repeating this. It's like they probably had, of these 5 or 6 source videos that they were repeating over and over again, they must have gotten like the divvy. So it's this team that's going to repeat this video, and this one on Archaeopteryx, and this one on Tiktaalik. And so they would just go and boop, boop, boop over and over and over again.
James,
yeah, jump in.
Did you see Brian Stevens' account thing in the chat? He said those women are fembots. Maybe they're fembots with Twitter accounts.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. They're always beautiful. The screen pictures of them are always babes. But it's highly likely, and the men are always extremely good looking too. I mean, this is like the GQ quarterly for Istanbul in terms of all the images. There's apparently no such thing as a not attractive Harun Yahyaist anywhere. But the thing that what intrigued me about it...
Actually, all of them are screened on their...
screen captures
on beauty,
yeah.
And that's part of what lets them in. I think Yahya has some kind of school or what he calls university where he trains these people, and so outer appearance is a factor that comes in if you want to get in Yahya's
He's
school.
got his, shall we say, eye-twitchy obsessions. In addition to the anti-evolution stuff. And of course, he is an Islamic, not quite a full-blown fundamentalist, but definitely he's got, I would put him as a Turkish version of the culture camp, because he rails on about atheists and secularism and free inquiry of stuff and the suppression of the intelligent design information and all that. If you read his stuff, and they're always glossy books. BJ says that Harun Yahya sent his book to biologists free and unasked for. Yeah, that one of them that in fact cued me in was the Atlas of Creation, because even though I was going down through probably 30 or 40 of the posters, all with the Turkish sounding names and all of that, and then finally, bingo, was one that linked directly to Atlas of Creation. And then quite a few later on not only did that, but one to Adnan Oknar speeches. And at that point I go, well, James, like, duh, of course, James, they're all Harun Yahyas.
Help me out. Atlas of Creation, was that the book? What was basically just pictures comparing fossils to living animals and claiming
some
that
of it,
those
yeah.
were the same?
Richard Dawkins made a big deal out of it, because I think they sent that, one of them sent a copy to him, where it turned out one of them was a picture of a stuffed animal in a tree, and that they did not realize that it was, there was stuff that was just ridiculously bad, stuff that had gotten into there. But because even though Yahya claims, or Akhtar puts everything under his own name, there's very little likelihood he does most of the work. This is all the little minions that do and compile this stuff, and they keep on retreading. I think I've got 30 or 40 of the books that have been produced over the years from him, and now they basically are. I don't know that they've done all that many recently, but they're all very busily. They're like a Bollywood version of a science text, where there's a lot of very bright, busy pictures, and the graphics are just over the top. And there's footnote references, which, if you look back, they tend not to be to intelligent design or creationist material directly. They're to the sources they've stolen from there. So it fits in as a big secondary redaction thing. And one of the projects, if I ever live long enough to deal with it, will be to go through source analyses to try to figure out what's been copied from what. I think I put up a brief reference to Yahya, or I should say Yahya, in a Slam Dunk, because one of the things, he kind of glanced past the reptile-mammal transition at one point, and so he got popped into it on that. It hasn't been a big deal for him, but he's a weird bunch. And so the thing that intrigued me most about this long barrage that obviously had gone on for hours at FFRF is, what the hell did they think they were doing with it? What purpose did they think they were serving? Did they think that a whole bunch of people at the Freedom from Religion Foundation were going to be so bowled over by an Archaeoraptor video that was put out by Akhtar's group that they were going to suddenly turn turtle and become Muslims? I mean, this is just nonsense. You don't know the demographic here.
Well, I have to say, to me, it's the best description ever. I'm going to remember that. Bollywood creationism. That, to me, sums it up completely.
Yeah,
but,
yeah.
Yeah, it is funny that they would target the FFRF. Why not target some biologists, at least? Because...
Yeah. Well, it wouldn't surprise me if they didn't, and I don't do analytics to where I pay attention to how many account numbers everybody has, but I know there are techniques that can do that. They probably noticed how many people follow FFRF, that it was a target audience with a lot of buzz to it, maybe, and so they decided to invade it for that reason, and clog them up for a few hours with their little postings on there. But the sheer repetition of it, what nincompoop! Even when you realize that you're in a different language, you're Turks and they're, or Arabic speakers and they're English-speaking FFRF people by and large, what nincompoop is going to think that they're going to be persuaded by 15 different postings of the same short creationist video? It's just nonsense.
Yeah, it might be their way of thinking, because to them, it's what's repeated the most is probably the truth. So that's their way of thinking, I guess, and that's how they then act against an account like
that saying the truth once is correct and doing it umpteen different times. I particularly love the one, in fact, I called attention. I linked occasionally, at self-serving as I was, to Slam Dunk and some of my web postings, because they brought up Archaeoraptor. And for those of you, let me put that into the little feed here so anybody can. Archaeoraptor. Boom, boom, boom. It was one of the rare examples of a recent fraudulent fossil, and those are very rare. There is a lot of faked up fossils in the Chinese trade, because every little Chinese town wants to have a science museum now. And so there's a huge market that got all these fabulous new fossils that are coming out from both the Cambrian era and the Mesozoic, with feathered dinosaurs and that. So there are perfectly legitimate ones. Well, you want a really splashy one for your local museum in Hangzhou, maybe you won't look too close at whether or not it's been slabbed together. And that's what happened with this Archaeoraptor one, which looked like a really interesting, unusual form of a feathered dinosaur that was not quite a bird yet. And so it got picked up by Stephen Serkis, who just died a couple years ago. He died fairly young. He was only about my age. And Circus had kind of a checkered career as a budding paleontologist. I mean, he didn't do a hell of a lot of work in them because he'd written some very nice books and things on the subject. He and his wife did a lot of work, and he got connected up in part with the Alan Fiducia gang that didn't like the bird dinosaur theory, and very, very busy, odd ups and downs with him before he died. But anyway, he was connected up with this bunch that had found this fossil, and they brought it to America, and they tried to write up a paper for Science, and Science went, yeah, I think you need to think this through a little more. And they tried to write one up for Nature, and they went, yeah, I think you better think this through some more. And that should have been dead giveaway, that there was maybe some problems with this fossil. But National Geographic proceeded where Nature and Science did not fear to tread. And they did a big splashy cover picture of a reconstruction of Archaeoraptor. And very quickly, Storrs Olson, part of the gang at the Smithsonian, who doesn't like the bird dinosaur theory, lit into it like nobody's business and pointed out this was probably a fraudulent fossil that had been concocted together from two different ones. And the shit hit the fan, and there had to be a mea culpa investigation. And all of this happened very, very quickly, literally over the course of months. And I call attention to it in chapter 2 of the Old Tip, and also in 3 Mac Revolutionary Episodes, and I reference it a little bit in Slam Dunk. Well, the fun thing that I call attention to with Archaeoraptor is what it was made of. Partly it was an actual bird fossil from the period. The other one turns out to be something way more interesting than Archaeoraptor ever was, and that's Microraptor. Because it turns out that one of the, I can't remember whether it was the front or the back half, I think it was the front half. It turns out that this was this little critter called Microraptor that was really unusual in that it had feathers on all 4 limbs, not just on the wing part. And so it was a very unusual, weird glider. And they found full regular fossils of Microraptor. So Archaeoraptor at best is a, oh, hi, Richard Sky. He said hi to me in the live feed. That, or Ski, my mistake if I mispronounced the way I should read it. Anyway, Microraptor makes Archaeoraptor just a weird little footnote that some people misinterpreted the thing as something else because it was a concocted fake fossil that was quickly uncovered and is completely irrelevant to the discussion of birds and dinosaurs because we've got so many more fascinating fossils, including Microraptor, since. So Archaeoraptor is such a dead letter to deal with, but not so for Harun Yahya, that they're still banging into it. Yeah, Drafting Master, yes, Microraptor is super interesting. I've got a model of it when I still had enough money to be able to buy dinosaur models. There was a really beautiful depiction of the thing. And there was a wonderful show, you can probably find it online, from Nova, that was done now, oh, it's been a few years back, between the camps, trying to figure out how it flew. And so you had a bunch from Storrs Olson and the gang at the Smithsonian, versus the Museum of Natural History in New York, Norrell and that bunch that are firmly in the dinosaur evolution camp. And they both did an competing analyses to try to figure out how it flew and to test out their various models of how flight originated. In some respects, it was a side issue because if you're familiar with the flight evolution issue that's in the old days, like 1990, is did the birds develop flight by running on the ground and gradually their feathered wings caused them to take wing that way? Or were they climbers that would then glide down and there was a feathered thing that was a selection pressure? So it was the top-down arboreal model versus the bottom-up cursorial model. And today it's more likely the fact that both are true and both are false. That dinosaurs could climb, small ones could climb, that they would run up on trees and things or run up on rocks and jump down, and they would also be running along, and there's a certain advantage, selection pressure to even a stubby wing in terms of flap, flap, flap to get you away and up an incline. And so they performed experiments with chickens and various other animals to find out that there's a lot of selection pressures on it. So today, Kevin Padian and that would say that this was a dead letter issue, that there was not 2 competing versions, but lots of different selection pressures all acting on it. And additional features that feathers were probably a pretty going concern in the dinosaurs for reasons other than flight originally, that they were for sexual display and also for insulation for the little chicks. And so we don't know a heck of a lot about how widespread proto-feathers were on the babies of dinosaurs, but there's certainly a large amount of evidence now that how widely it became distributed in the Cretaceous. Now, this Microraptor dates to the Cretaceous, which would put it about, about 70, 80, 90, 100 million years ago period. And by which time, apparently, there were a bunch of different lineages of flighty dinosauroids knocking around. That it wasn't just the lineage that leads off to modern birds, which are the ornithines. The dominant group of birds during the Cretaceous were the enantornithines that had a different shoulder blade construction, and we still don't know the deep roots of where they split off from the theropod line, because they're very small animals and the bones are really fragile, and you need a Lagerstätten deposit to be able to spot them. There's a lot of discussion there, which, by the way, never gets discussed in the anti-evolution literature. Yeah. So, yeah, you were going to say something, Cap?
Yeah, I was one. David Last said some. He changed Harun Yahya's name. Harun Haha.
Yeah. Well, if he were funny, as far as I can tell, there's no indication that Adnan Oktar has even the slightest sense of humor. He looks a little bit like a creepy cult leader when you see him interviewed. He's got this very trimmed beard, and he's always surrounded by young, adulating, largely men. And then, of course, a lot of pictures of nubile women that pop up in his feeds. And he's got umpteen different screen identities that permute these things, both under the Harun Yahya tag and variants on that on Twitter, and Adnan Oktar tags. I don't even follow all of them because I don't feel like being bored to death. But I do keep track of a few.
Old Scratch said the evidence keeps growing. I don't understand how they can dismiss it all with the wave of the hand.
Oh, but that's how they do it.
I can answer that. They do it because well, as most young Earth creationists and all other religious people like that, they generally have a mantra they subscribe to. If reality contradicts the Bible, reality is wrong.
Oh, well, even in the intelligent design gang, that they're not quoting scripture. If you look at Günter Beckley, recent Christian convert, I think he became a Roman Catholic, and he's now one of the one and only paleontologist on the intelligent design side. And I've commented in just last week, a couple of episodes back and previously on some of Beckley's stuff, that he doesn't know what he thinks happened. And so there's a remarkable vagueness to it, but he can't claim that he doesn't know the technical literature or that he's invoking God. But functionally, he's doing hand waving, that he wants to dismiss the evolutionary chain by taking little pot shots, just like Rupe and Sanford did. There's connecting up the grand arc of the discussion. It's the same methodology, that it's a limited data set, it's authority quoting, it's not really working out what you think happened. For those of you who don't know, my big four methodology issues that are absolute universals: over-reliance on secondary sources they don't fact-check, limited data field that they don't really work through what their model is competing. It's always a negative argument. God of the gaps, you can't explain X. And then what evidence would change their mind? What would a fossil need to look like to be transitional? What would prove Darwinian natural selection? Really not clear about that, because ultimately they don't allow evidence to get in there. So how can they do it without hand-waving? They do it by hand-waving. And sometimes they're highly PhD'd hand wavers. Sometimes they're Harun Yahya parasitical hand wavers. And sometimes they're way down in the basement with the people you encounter on Twitter that are just hand waving the little dogmas. But it's all the same brand of hand waving. None of them are going to be able to account for the data. None of them show a genuine curiosity about the data. That independent, if they want to put forward a creationist model, if they want to put forward a design model, fine. But you got to account for the data. Every fragment of data. Why there are proto-feathers that are now found in amber. I alluded to that in Slam Dunk. And by the way, if you haven't got my book, Evolution Slam Dunk, why not?
Yeah. Drafting Master was responding to Brian Stevens, and they said, yeah, I hate that, because Brian said facts don't matter because reasons. They said, as I run into people who argue with me or ideas, I hate it as you show them why design does not work, and then they go, well, you are not God, so you can't say he's wrong. I don't know how many times I've run into that argument, because I'm assuming from their name they are a drafter by trade. So I'm in the same boat, and I fully understand that. And they're like, "Well, you don't know the original design." No, but I can look at it and see why it's bad.
Yeah. Well, I go into a lot of
which also would mean that they're not ideas but creationists, because intelligent design does not propose a god. It just proposes an intelligent designer.
That would make sense. All right. Yeah, I guess I'm guessing they argue from a God designed everything. Maybe that's why drafting put them in there.
Intelligent design is a buzzword, and a lot of people who are actually creationists use it as a tag.
Intelligent design was just created to give some credence to the young Earth creation movement.
No,
to make it more
it's
sciencey,
more complicated than that.
Yeah, and to make it able to get it into the science textbooks, because now
it's a bit more complicated than that. And I go into a lot of them in tip 1.6 and 7, the mutation trails that lead off to a lot of this stuff. It is correct that something like Pandas and People created a lot of the rhetoric of intelligent design that then got co-opted and synergistically looped in with intelligent design. But strictly speaking, the gang at the Discovery Institute has always distanced themselves from certainly young Earth creationism. And they've whittled their argument down to this kind of generic form. I put a mention up to Creationism Light, which is one of the chapters, chapter 4 at TIP at the website. I go into the one big flaw that I can see with all design arguments is the moment you attribute something to design, then everything about it is morally accessible. I use the Titanic iceberg problem. You gonna jump in there, Cap?
Yeah, drafting did clarify what they meant. They said, yeah, they argue from a design, so I just put them in the ID camp as well as the creationist camp.
It's a legitimate thing to always bother about when you're dealing with somebody who's trying to wave design arguments at you, because they may or may not be what I would classify strictly as an intelligent design advocate versus a creationist, and more specifically young Earth creationist. And you do that by some of the details. If somebody is talking intelligent design and then they start talking about you can't date anything by radiometric dating, excuse me, they're a young Earth creationist, no matter what their rhetoric is. Intelligent designers, most of the intelligent design advocates, air quotes, that I encounter on Twitter haven't read any intelligent design. They haven't read Michael Behe. They don't know much about any of that stuff directly. They've just scavenged material, and you get some weird ones. There was a Dawa, is a short form of his name, but he's a Muslim apologist that he's gone a little silent. Either that, or I think he's blocked me too. And he's had several different iterations in his name. But the point is, he would be tossing off stuff that he scavenged from intelligent design rhetoric. All a bunch of Protestants.
Yeah.
James, can I quickly interrupt?
Yeah,
I have to go. Two friends of mine had a stream planned, and they postponed it for an hour just for me. So,
okay, well, bye-bye. Thank you for showing up there. It's wee hours of the morning there in Holland. Now you can go off to your life.
Okay, and I'll catch up with you this week. And
yeah, we'll set up a thing, because I'm still in tutorial stage on a lot of this stuff. I know I'm doing crappy training wheel videos here, and the better I can come up, I'd like to have your logo where I've got music and stuff, so it can be razzle dazzle and neat, like Jackson Wheat.
And that can work. And I have a free option for that, so I'll get in touch with you this week.
Yeah, we'll do it. We'll do a live a private feed where I can see you and you can train me through, because I'm low as molasses on some stuff.
Yeah, I was
okay.
I was
okay. Thanks.
Bye, Peter.
Bye.
Bye.
Yeah, I was going to re-comment on what drafting said with where they were coming from with they put him in the ID camp as well as the creationist camp. I was guessing that's what they're doing, only because I used to do that as well. Because you can be an idea without being a creationist, but you can't be a creationist without being an idea almost. And that's why I usually had them as, well, they're a creationist and they're an idea, or they're just an idea, or they're just a creationist. I didn't realize that they were like separate things. I actually, learned that from doing more research on. I'm like, oh, they aren't the same thing. Okay, so that's why I was like, yeah, I understand exactly where you're coming from drafting.
Yeah, I make a distinction in my tip work between two main blocks, and it's quite a reliable one. There's young Earth creationists and then not young Earth creationists. And the not young Earth creationists are old Earth creationists and intelligent designers. So somebody from the Discovery Institute like Steve Meyer, I do not call him a creationist. I explicitly view him as such. You can legitimately call you Ross, that dwindling brand of old Earth creationism. But there are people who are in the design camp that I nonetheless categorize as young Earth creationists. David Capej is routinely called an intelligent design advocate. And no, he's a young Earth creationist. Thank you very much. The guy from JPL, and I have an allusion to him a little bit in Slam Dunk. You'll find some of his stupidity there. And then there's Paul Nelson, who is a son of a young Earth creationist, and he himself remains a young Earth creationist. You can never catch him ever discussing the subject in detail at any of his Discovery Institute or any other postings. He doesn't make a secret of it, but he is enabled because nobody goes out of his way to discuss it. John Sanford is another example. He's a young Earth creationist, but he doesn't make chronology arguments. Neither does Paul Nelson. All of his postings are on generic design arguments that are chronology free. So the flagellum and the Cambrian explosion are somehow problems for evolution without him saying when he thinks the Cambrian explosion was and when he thinks the flagella appeared. So by playing off of that design argument, they create a generic anti-evolutionism that wears differently in a chronological framework versus a non-chronological framework. That if you're talking about the Cambrian explosion and you got little anomalocarids and Wawaxias and all these other weird little critters, and you can see a lot of it in the 3 Macroevolutionary Episode book that's got pictures, it makes a difference if you think that's taking place 520 million years ago with a long wind-up of tens of millions of years coming off of the collapse of the Ediacara ecosystem during the Great Freeze-Up in the Cryogenian period, versus you think that those fossils got to be there because they were in a landslide that took place in the flood 2,300 years BC. That's a big difference. And the idea that you can bounce off of these two world frames so effortlessly, in the intelligent design worldview, it's easy to do that because they're not chronological. So Steve Meyer, I've alluded to it before, Steve Meyer did a paper with 2 young Earth creationists, Marcus Ross, who's a young Earth creationist paleontologist, and Paul Nelson. And the other, I've forgotten who the other, I think it was Cheen or somebody that was the other intelligent designer, non-young Earth creationist. So you had 50% of them young Earth creationists and 50% not. And here they are doing a spiel on the Cambrian explosion without any reference to chronology. And half of them think this happened 4,500 years ago, and the other half think it took place 500 million years ago. Didn't they ever compare notes? And the obvious answer is no, they mustn't. Because then they would have to work out that map of time thing, that number 3 problem. What did they think happened with the data? This happened then. If you got in a time machine and went back in time, what would you see? If they never get to that stage, and they don't, there are no counterexamples anywhere in anti-evolutionism, then you can get this fog bank. So always be careful when somebody waves air quotes design or air quotes intelligent design or specified complexity or irreducible complexity. They may not be a young Earth creationist, but don't assume that they are a young Earth creationist in disguise. You need to probe more to find out their source base.
Yeah. And I know, like I said, I'm going off of what drafting has said. I am, like, when I was kind of probably where they're at and how they classify them is, if you were an older, you had creationists and ID, but some could be in both. And that's kind of how I viewed it. I from the way it sounds, drafting is kind of the same.
I'm trying to change the taxonomy. I'm by nature a systematist. If you haven't noticed that by now, you're blind as a bat. I always categorize things. And when you looked at it functionally, the demarcation was the young Earth creationist frame. that the vast majority of anti-evolutionists are young Earth creationists. The vast majority of websites are young Earth creationists. The vast majority of anti-evolution advocates and activists, the ones who raise stinks at school boards and try to get disclaimers through, these are young Earth creationists. Very, very few of them are doctrinally old Earth creationist intelligent designers. And old Earth creationism has shrunk down to this little nub that's orbiting the black hole that is Uras, and that's about it. And they're very popular as an apologetic argument in less conservative religious frames. But from a practical thing about who's doing the debate and who's citing who and what ammo is being used, they're off the map. They're just an asterisk. It was revealing, as I pointed out in Slam Dunk, that whereas almost all of the air quotes serious criticism of the reptile-mammal transition are from young Earth creationists. The intelligent design camp is evasive and superficial, and old Earth creationist Hugh Ross never has discussed the subject at all. That's the measure of the slide.
Yeah.
Well,
I did have a question for you though, RJ. You just referred to Hugh Ross as a black hole. Is that because he's infinitely dense?
He gets close. He's not only that, he's a rather limp-wristed debater with young Earth creationists. He's debated, and he's a nice schlub. I did a Skype with him quite a few months ago, but he's never posted it on his Skype channel, so I doubt he's ever going to post it. Probably because
imagine why.
Probably because he couldn't get any headway with me. He couldn't make any apologetic ins. That I was ahead of him on the data field, and I insisted on not rolling over for his rhetoricals flourish. We talked for an hour. I mean, originally it was going to only be a half hour long, so we had a lot of discussion back and forth. I give him props in the fact that he's honest about interacting with people who are outside of his frame, but he is always angling for the apologetic edge here, and I don't think he made any headway with me, so there was no point to put it up, and I doubt I'm ever going to have another conversation with him, but I'm here. I'm here, you can have a Skype with me, but please put it up so other people can see, not keep it swept aside like you tend to do on stuff. Anyway, so we're past the hour on here. O'Brien G says, you Ross, oi. That's kind of covers it there. Hope everybody enjoyed the show. We've exhausted the subject matter, I hope, on this. There will be more on Rupe and Sanford next week. And I try to put in to the linkages, any of these little things that pop up currently, so that there's elements of topical to it. But anyway, I think there's a lot for you to look up and a lot to study and investigate. I'm always open to questions people can put in the feeds. Oh, the one area, I'll make a slight reference to C. Brown, the little young Earth creationist nitwit who, and I'm calling you a nitwit, who didn't like the first part of this series, and he went out and bought Rupe and Sanford's book. Well, thank you very much. I've made a sale for the opposition, but he's just a doctrinal young Earth creationist and a credulous one. He doesn't seem to know that you need to offer source evidence for stuff, that he thinks he can just link to a creationist that says what he wants to be true, and that's all it takes. And he won't look any farther. So he wanted to have a video discussion with me, and he wasn't on Twitter or anything, so I would have had to have given him a link somewhere or other. But I had no problems with him coming on this show, for that matter. But I would be asking him source methods questions, and I think he wanted to go railing on about polystrate fossils. That's one of his obsessions. But I could never get him to engage on any of that, or on any of the points relating to the Sanford argument. So I'm afraid that Mr. C. Brown, you are likely to remain kind of a thug in there, where you're just repeating tropes that you never bother to study. I'll put it this way. Let me put it in the short form. Here's the gauntlet. Anybody in the year 2018 that thinks the Earth is 6,000 years ago is a scientific illiterate. Anybody who thinks the big global flood happened according to the Answers in Genesis version is a scientific illiterate. Anybody who, in the bigger context, thinks that all life on Earth is not related by natural branching common descent, independent of how life originated, might have been a miracle, might not, but nevertheless, the last billion years or so sure looks like evolution. And with the reptile-mammal transition, book plug, as I had the end line on there as a paraphrase, if God didn't want us to believe in evolution, he shouldn't have created the therapsids. That was just plain dumb. And I will end with that. Thank you very much. And hope you enjoyed the show, and tell everybody about the thing. And if you can get my books and or support the project and or just retweet to everybody or link up in your networks, let people you know, maybe harangue a reviewer, book reviewers, or other people saying, hey, RJ is here. He's got some stuff to contribute. Thank you very much. So we are now stopping the broadcast. Thank you, Cap, and thank earlier for Peter and Jackson to have helped in the show. And hopefully, if I haven't been struck by lightning, I'll be there next week.